All right, welcome. Whether you're cramming for a history exam or you're just really curious about the moments that literally forged a nation, you're in the right place. We're going to break down the biggest turning points in India's fight for freedom all in one quick study guide. So let's just dive right in.
So let me ask you this. What actually pushes an entire nation, millions of people, to finally stand up and protest all at once? It's never just one thing, right? It's usually this powerful mix of real hardship, some game-changing new ideas, and a deep, profound sense of injustice. That's really the core question we're going to unpack here.
And here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with what life was like in India right after World War I. Then we'll get into Gandhi's revolutionary idea. After that, we'll look at the one law that sparked a nationwide firestorm, witness the tragedy that changed everything, and finally, see how all of this started to bring a nation together. Okay, so to really get why millions of people were suddenly ready for a massive national movement, you have to rewind to the years just after World War I. Across India, the situation was just bleak. Any hope for a better future after the war was fading, and fast.
I mean, just look at this list. It was a perfect storm of misery. First, you've got the economy. The British had massive war loans, so they cranked up taxes on everyone. Prices for basic things just about doubled. Then you've got this huge social anger because the British were literally forcing villagers into the army. And, as if that wasn't enough, crops were failing everywhere, leading to massive food shortages. And right on top of that, a deadly flu epidemic hit. It was just one blow after another.
And this really shows the human cost of it all. The 1921 census estimated that somewhere between 12 and 13 million people died from the famines and the epidemic. Just let that sink in for a second. This wasn't just some abstract economic problem, it was an absolutely devastating loss of life that touched pretty much everyone.
And right into this environment of desperation and anger steps a new kind of leader. Mahatma Gandhi gets back to India in 1915, and he brings with him a totally new philosophy for how to protest, a method he'd actually developed and tested in South Africa. So what in the world is Satyagraha? A lot of people think it just means passive resistance, but it's way more active than that. It's this idea of mass protest built on the power of truth. The core belief is that if your cause is truly right and just, you don't need violence. You can win by appealing to the conscience, to the humanity of your opponent.
And you can really feel the power of the idea in Gandhi's own words right here. He called it soul force. For him, nonviolence wasn't just a smart political strategy. It was the supreme dharma, like a sacred duty. This idea that a moral power could unite all Indians, well, it was absolutely revolutionary. Now, before going peep, Gandhi basically tested his idea out on a smaller scale. You can see here in 1917, he helped peasants in Champara and Kheda. A year later, in 1918, he organized a movement for cotton mill workers in Ahmedabad. These early wins were absolutely crucial. They were proof of concept. They showed everyone that this new method could actually work. So, feeling pretty good about these successes, Gandhi was ready to think bigger. And in 1919, the British government basically handed him the perfect reason to do it, a law so unfair, so unjust, that it would unite the entire country in pure anger. Okay, if you're studying for an exam, star this one. The Rowlatt Act of 1919 gave the government insane powers to shut down political activity. It meant they could arrest and throw someone in jail for up to 2 years without even giving them a trial. People saw this for exactly what it was, a direct assault on their most basic rights. And they were furious. So, in response, Gandhi called for a nationwide strike, or hartal. And the reaction? Well, you can just see it in this picture. It was enormous. There were rallies in cities everywhere, workers walked off the job, shops shut their doors. Nobody had ever seen a protest on this scale before. The British were, to put it mildly, completely freaked out by this. They were worried that protesters would cut railway and telegraph lines, so they decided to come down, and come down hard. They started arresting local leaders, and then they made a fateful decision. They imposed martial law in the city of Amritsar. And this image, it just gives you a sense of the atmosphere, doesn't it? The tension is palpable. With General Dyer now in charge, Amritsar basically became an occupied city. This heavy-handed approach was setting the stage for one of the absolute darkest days in India's history. What happened on April 13th, 1919 was so much more than a tragedy.
The Jallianwala Bagh massacre became the single event that horrified the entire nation and unified the independence movement in a way nothing else had before. This was the point of no return. So picture the scene. It's a large, peaceful crowd. They're gathered in Jallianwala Bagh, which is this big public garden enclosed by walls. Some people were there to peacefully protest, for sure, but many others were just villagers from out of town, there to celebrate the annual Baisakhi festival. And here's the critical part. Most of them had no idea that martial law had been declared. Then, General Dyer shows up with his troops. He blocks off the only ways in or out, and without a single word of warning, he orders his soldiers to open fire on the packed, unarmed crowd. They just kept firing for about 10 minutes until they literally ran out of ammunition. Hundreds of people were killed. And this is maybe the most chilling part of all. Dyer later said his goal was to produce a moral effect. He wasn't trying to break up a protest. His stated goal was to terrorize people into submission. This quote is just devastating proof of the brutal thinking behind the attack. As you can imagine, when news of the massacre got out, northern India just exploded in rage. There were strikes, clashes with the police, attacks on government buildings. The government's response? Even more brutality, forcing people to crawl on the streets to salute any British official they saw. The violence was spiraling, and seeing this, Gandhi eventually called off the whole movement. But even though he called it off, something fundamental had shifted. The shared experience of protesting together and then being repressed together was starting to build this new sense of national unity, a feeling that went way beyond old regional or class divisions. And this is such a fascinating and crucial point to understand. The idea of freedom, or Swaraj, actually meant different things to different people. For a peasant, freedom meant no more crushing rents and an end to forced labor. For a plantation worker, it meant the simple right to leave the plantation and go back to their village. And for the urban middle class, it was about having a say in government and basic civil rights. Everyone had their own vision of what a free India would look like. And this is really the key takeaway from all of this. While everyone's idea of a perfect future might have been different, the one thing they all had in common was the feeling of being oppressed by the same colonial power. And that shared struggle, that became the powerful glue that started to bond this incredibly diverse country together. Which leaves us with one final thing to think about. We've just seen how all these different groups had really different dreams for the future. So what do you think? To make a huge movement like this actually work, is having a shared enemy more powerful, more important than having a perfectly aligned shared goal? It's definitely something to chew on.